What if the person you fear most wasn't out there, among the judgments of others, but inside you? What if the very thing you spent your entire life trying to hide was the very source of your true freedom? We live in a culture that teaches us from an early age to show only the best of ourselves. We learn to smile when we're broken, to appear strong when we're fragile, to flaunt our achievements even when we feel empty. But behind the social mask lies an uncomfortable truth. We carry within us aspects we'd rather not see. Parts we deem shameful, inadequate, dangerous. Carl Gustav Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist who dedicated his life to exploring the depths of the human mind, called this hidden side the shadow. And the most disturbing thing is that it is not something external. It is you. Think for a moment, what parts of yourself do you avoid facing? Perhaps it's your anger, your vanity, your greed, your desire for power, or even your vulnerability that insists on surfacing. These facets, when denied, don't disappear. On the contrary, they become stronger, denser, more dangerous, because they operate silently outside your awareness. And that's precisely where fear arises. Not fear of the world, nor fear of the unknown, but fear of oneself. This fear can manifest itself in subtle ways. In procrastination you never understand. In excessive self-criticism that paralyzes you. In constant judgment of others, which, in fact, is a reflection of the internal battles you wage against yourself. Jung said that what we hate most in others is often a projection of what we can't bear to see in ourselves. The paradox is cruel. The more we try to stifle who we are, the more we become hostage to this force. The shadow doesn't disappear with repression. It merely changes its mask. Look around. How many people live trapped in artificial versions of themselves? How many hide their emptiness behind smiling selfies? How many turn their lives into a carefully edited showcase that crumbles as soon as the lights go out? Self-fear is one of the greatest human dilemmas. And perhaps you've experienced it yourself. That feeling that if you delve too deeply within yourself, you'll find something you don't want to see. That's why we distract ourselves. That's why we overload ourselves with tasks. That's why we relentlessly seek external approval. Because facing the raw mirror of the soul is often more painful than facing any external enemy. But Jung warns us, we cannot be whole until we look to this side. Because the shadow, though dark, holds within itself not only what we fear, but also the power we lack. Fear, after all, can be a sign. It points to places we don't yet dare to live. It reveals the territory of the unknown within us. And that's precisely what brings us to the central paradox of this video. To become free, you must become what you fear about yourself. Carl Gustav Jung was perhaps one of the most courageous thinkers of the 20th century. While many psychiatrists and philosophers sought to explain human beings based on what is visible, behaviors, symptoms, social structures, Jung dared to look at what lies hidden behind the curtains of consciousness. He believed that the human psyche is not a clear surface, but a deep ocean, full of subterranean currents that shape who we are, even when we don't realize it. It is in this invisible ocean that the shadow. Jung described the shadow as the sum total of everything we reject in ourselves. Repressed desires, impulses we deem immoral, memories that shame us, personality traits that don't match the image we want to project to the world. The shadow is, in other words, the sum of the parts of ourselves we prefer to deny. But here's the crucial point. The shadow isn't just the evil we carry. It's also the repository of unrealized potential. It contains our stifled creativity, our power of assertion, our lost authenticity. When we deny the shadow, we're not only burying what scares us, but also what could liberate us. Imagine a person who, since childhood, was taught to be nice, to never show anger or set limits. They grow up believing that anger is something ugly, dangerous, and that needs to be hidden. But this repressed anger doesn't go away. It transforms into silent resentment, unexpected outbursts, and psychosomatic illnesses. This person's shadow is not only their hidden rage, but also their ability to say no, to protect herself, to assert her will. What she fears is, paradoxically, what could save her. Another example, someone who represses their vulnerability because they fear appearing weak. This person wears a self-sufficient armor every day, but pays the price of loneliness and lack of intimacy. What they reject is the very quality that could bring them closer to others and allow them to experience true love. Jung believed that integrating the shadow was one of the most important steps in the process of individuation, the path to truly becoming who one is. But this integration is not simple because it requires the courage to look within without masks. And herein lies the paradox. The more we flee from the shadow, the more it controls us. It infiltrates our dreams, our impulsive reactions, our relationships. It manifests itself in exaggerated criticism of others, in the difficulty accepting differences, in the unconscious repetition of mistakes we swore never to make again. Perhaps you've noticed this in yourself. That irrational irritation towards someone who triggers a strange emotion in you. Perhaps it's not that person that's the problem, but rather the part of you that sees itself reflected in them. What bothers you on the outside is often a reflection of what's hidden within. In the modern world, where we're all forced to perform an identity, whether at work, on social media, or even in friendships, the shadow becomes increasingly repressed. The more we strive to appear perfect, the further away we become from the truth. And the more we hide it, the more it takes its toll in anxiety, depression, and self-destructive impulses. Jung wasn't saying we should simply release the shadow recklessly. The danger of completely identifying with it is real. His proposal was different. Integrate. Acknowledge its existence, face it, give it conscious space so that it doesn't need to act in the shadows. Becoming whole for Jung wasn't about getting rid of the shadow, but about learning to dialogue with it. Recognizing that it is part of who we are, and that within it resides a vital energy capable of transforming our existence. Because the truth is, we can't choose only the acceptable half of ourselves. There is no light without shadow, no goodness without the possibility of evil, no courage without intimate contact with fear. Human beings are, by their very nature, paradoxical. And to ignore this is to live a lie. This is why Jung asserted that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but rather by becoming conscious of darkness. True transformation does not occur in denial, but in encounter. And perhaps that's exactly what scares us most. The idea that we need to embrace what we reject, that we need to get closer to what we fear most about ourselves. Because, deep down, becoming who we truly are means also becoming who we're afraid of being. Fear has many masks. It appears in the hesitation before making an important decision. In the uncomfortable silence when we need to speak an uncomfortable truth. In the tightness in our chest before exposing ourselves to the judgment of others. But the deepest fear is not born of external circumstances. It springs from the encounter with our own essence. Carl Jung reminds us that fear is not just an enemy to be fought. It is also a guide, a sign that we are facing something vital, something that can expand our existence if we have the courage to navigate it. What you fear within yourself is often precisely what holds the power to transform your life. Think of a shy person who trembles at the mere thought of public speaking. Their fear isn't just of the audience but of their own voice. They fear the impact they could have if they stopped hiding. And that's precisely where the possibility for growth lies, in confronting their own repressed power. What seems like a threat is actually an invitation to expansion. Another example, the perfectionist who lives in fear of failure. They hold themselves to unattainable standards, not out of love for excellence, but because they fear being seen as human, fallible, vulnerable. This fear paralyzes them, preventing them from taking risks, from creating, from living. But if they could overcome this fear, they would discover that failure doesn't destroy them. On the contrary, it brings them closer to authenticity, to the freedom to be who they are without suffocating masks. Fear in this sense is like a mirror. It reflects the invisible boundaries that delimit our current identity. It shows us the places we haven't yet dared to inhabit within ourselves. Each fear is a map to an unexplored territory of the soul. However, modern society teaches us to interpret fear only as a sign of danger. We live numb to the logic of comfort and security, avoiding any situation that confronts us. We create stable routines, consume constant distractions, and construct edited versions of ourselves so no one notices our flaws. But in doing so, we miss the opportunity for transformation. Jung said that, the person who has not passed through the hell of his own passions has never truly overcome them. Fear is precisely the gateway to this hell, not in the religious sense but in the psychological sense. It places us before the fire of what we hide, and only by passing through it can we become whole. Perhaps you've felt it, that fear that, when faced, turns into strength. The fear of starting a difficult conversation ends up deepening a relationship. The fear of leaving a boring job that turns into the chance for a new path. The fear of admitting one's own fragility that opens space for truer connections. The paradox is that fear is not only a sign of threat, but also a sign of life. If you don't feel fear, you're likely stuck in stagnation, in a comfort zone that slowly suffocates the soul. Fear, however uncomfortable, is proof that you still have horizons to explore. And here's the most challenging part. Often what we fear most are not our weaknesses, but our hidden strengths. As Jung said, people go to analysis not to cure their neuroses, but to escape their fate. In other words, we often seek help not because we can't bear our pain, but because we can't bear the idea of becoming who we could be. There's something frightening about freedom, something frightening about embracing yourself completely. It's easier to live with half your soul than to carry the whole of who you are. But it's precisely this wholeness that gives life meaning. Fear, then, is not the end of the road. It is the portal. It is the mirror that shows us the still incomplete image of ourselves. And the question that remains is, will you retreat from this mirror or will you walk through it? We live in an age that exalts the superficial. Everything is image, performance, spectacle. The digital world offers us shiny showcases where we can display carefully chosen fragments of who we are, rehearsed smiles, edited achievements, idealized routines. But behind this artificial shine, an uncomfortable silence grows, the shadow no one wants to reveal. Carl Jung would say we've never been so far from ourselves. Not because we've ignored the mind, but because we've turned it into a stage. The psyche has become content, and even vulnerability has become a commodity. Talking about anxiety, depression, or loneliness is often no longer an act of courage, but rather of personal branding. We reveal the wound, but only to the point where it still garners applause. What truly scares us remains buried. This culture of selective exposure doesn't eliminate the shadow, it only intensifies it. The more we project an ideal version of ourselves, the more we feel haunted by the contrast of what we hide. Hyperpositivity, the cult of success, and the obsession with productivity are often masks for the emptiness we can't face. Bauman, the Polish sociologist, described our era as liquid. Everything is fast, changeable, disposable. Relationships, jobs, identities. But if everything slips through our fingers, where is the solidity of being? The answer, almost always, is that it dissolves into inner silence, buried under layers of distraction. The shadow grows precisely in this space where no one wants to look. And there's also a cruel cultural factor. We live in a society that punishes imperfection. Error is not only human but unacceptable. A slip-up can lead to cancellation, exclusion, and ruthless judgment. The result? We've become experts at hiding. We don't show doubts, we don't show weaknesses, we don't show contradictions. And by not showing them, we cease to be whole. Jung stated that whatever is not consciously realized returns as destiny. In other words, what we hide from ourselves ends up governing us unconsciously. And we can see this clearly in the contemporary world. We've never talked so much about authenticity, but we've never been so far from it. We've never sought self-knowledge so much, but we've never been so distracted. The psychological consequences are devastating. Constant repression of the shadow generates symptoms that manifest in the body and mind. Chronic anxiety, panic attacks, a feeling of existential emptiness. It's not that we don't know what's wrong, it's that we don't want to look directly at the wound. We prefer to run, consume, post, and accumulate. But the price of avoiding the shadow is the loss of freedom. Because what isn't faced continues to control us. Those who don't acknowledge their own aggression end up becoming its hostage in uncontrolled outbursts. Those who don't acknowledge their vanity end up living for applause. Those who don't accept their vulnerability end up isolating themselves in armor of pride. In contemporary life, facing the shadow has become an act of resistance. It's going against the grain of a world that demands masks. It's choosing wholeness over performance. It's accepting that there is no identity without contradiction, that there is no light without darkness, that there is no authenticity without discomfort. Facing the shadow today doesn't just mean doing analysis or reading philosophy. It means, above all, silencing distractions and having the courage to listen to yourself. It means enduring the discomfort of not being perfect, of not being admired all the time, of not living up to expectations. It means choosing to be human instead of being a personal brand. The challenge is that everything around us conspires against this. Social media, the market, even our relationships are imbued with the logic of performance. But perhaps that's precisely why Jung's call is so urgent today. Without the courage to face the shadow, we will live eternally divided between who we show and who we hide. And the price of living divided is the feeling of never being whole anywhere. What if the freedom you seek so much was not in conquering something outside, but in rescuing something inside? What if the person you fear most actually becomes the person you were always called to be? Carl Gustav Jung invites us to a radical path. Integrate the shadow, not reject it. This means that your greatest growth will not come from continuing to show only the beautiful and acceptable parts of yourself, but from holding hands with that which you reject, with that which you hide even from yourself. Becoming who you are. This phrase, which also resonates with Nietzsche, doesn't mean molding yourself into an ideal of perfection. It means accepting yourself as a contradictory, complex, paradoxical being. It means admitting that you are made of light and darkness, love and anger, courage and fear. What you fear in yourself, your vulnerability, your ambition, your anger, your fragility, is exactly what needs to be acknowledged for you to become whole. Because everything that is rejected comes back to bite you. But everything that is embraced becomes strength. Imagine for a moment if you had the courage to become the version of yourself you hide. Not in the destructive sense, but in the integrative sense. The shy person who finally embraces their own voice. The perfectionist who learns to fail without destroying themselves. The controller who discovers the beauty of surrender. The invulnerable person who allows themselves to truly love. Becoming who you fear being is, at its core, an act of reconciliation. It's the humble gesture of saying to yourself, I no longer need to divide myself. It's stopping the internal wars that consume vital energy. It's recognizing that anger can be transformed into strength, that sadness can become compassion, that fear can become a guide. This process is neither easy nor quick. It requires silence in a noisy world. It requires patience in an age of haste. It requires courage in a culture that glorifies masks. But it is the only path to inner freedom. Because the truth is this, as long as you run away from what you fear within yourself, you will be its slave. But the moment you draw near and embrace it, what was once a shadow will become a source of light. Perhaps this is why Jung said that one does not achieve enlightenment by imagining figures of light, but rather by becoming conscious of the darkness. Becoming who you fear is not a fall, but an ascent. It is looking within with the same honesty with which we look without. And in the end, the paradox reveals itself. What you thought was your weakness is often your greatest strength. What you avoided most is what can give you the meaning you lacked. What you reject in yourself is precisely what makes you human. So, I leave you with the question. Who is the person inside you that you fear the most? And what would happen if, instead of continuing to run away from it, you finally let it in? Perhaps it is there, in this encounter, that you discover that becoming who you are afraid of being is, in fact, becoming who you were always destined to be. If this video touched you, maybe it's because a part of you was ready to hear it. Here at The Human Paradox, we continue exploring the contradictions that make us human. If you want to delve deeper into this labyrinth of mind and existence, subscribe to the channel, so we continue together in this process of becoming whole.